I've been following about 5 people on Twitter for the last year. Not even officially, I don't even have an account. And I disagree with the political opinions of pretty much every single one. And this got me thinking, why is it that so many of the people out there who post any kind of analysis, statistical or otherwise, that might be somewhat lockdown skeptical, also tend to have opinions which are very conservative in nature? Now, I don't mean to say this is across the board. Obviously, there are different people with different opinions. And obviously, we can think of a number of people, for example, many of the scientists who are members of the Great Barrington Declaration, who cannot be tarred with that brush. I'm speaking more about sort of opinion leaders on Twitter and in social media, and to a certain extent as well in journalism. For example, if you look at the kinds of publications that have published stories or opinions that are more so anti-lockdown in the past year, you'll find that it tends to be the same few journals doing this over and over again, and that these journals tend to be already very sort of conservative oriented. If you look at people on Twitter who post the daily statistics for COVID numbers, hospitalizations, deaths, and what have you in their region or around the world, and they provide analysis on this, many of those people tend to be leaning towards, for example, being neutral about whether the Capitol Hill riots were justified or not. And so in general, you see that these people who are out there who are doing quote-unquote God's work, say this is a non-religious person, but who are doing God's work to a certain extent by being skeptical and by looking at the numbers and providing perhaps a different take than has been shown in many of the many media outlets. They also have opinions on other things, other important things that I simply don't agree with. And it's difficult. It's difficult because, especially now with all the time and energy because of the lockdown that I have to devote to learning more about this pandemic, I have the ability to look past it. So, for example, when I went on one particular person's Twitter, this fellow called El Gato Malo, who's now been banned, who said a bunch of things that are sort of pro-Capitol insurrection, and he was banned around in January at some point. Prior to that, he, or even she, I don't know the gender, had been posting figures about the evolution of the pandemic, and it wasn't so much about what his or her opinions were, but it was rather just about a different perspective, and it was a very different perspective than the kind I would get from the news stations that I have, both television and news sites back at home. And yet, it was one more person who had this sort of these political opinions which are very, very strongly different than the ones that I hold. And most people probably don't have the mental energy left over at the end of the day after their work and their 17 kids and they're laid off and they're gaining 40 pounds because they've been stuck at home and they're stressed and everything. The relationship's going into the pits because they're in the same room as their partner for 48 hours a day. Most people don't have that much energy left over to look past the other opinions that these people have. It's something that I think is difficult to do, because you essentially have to say, I'm okay with listening to what you have to say. I'm okay with what you're sharing, even though I disagree fundamentally with so many important opinions that you have otherwise. To take an extreme example, I remember hearing so many times that Hitler was somewhat pro-environmental protection or animal conservation, things like that. Just because he's Hitler doesn't necessarily mean that every single opinion he has on every single topic in the world has to be pure evil, even if he was evil in many of the most important things that he did. Here, you seem to have many people who have opinions that I simply can't get behind in other areas, but who are the only ones going out there and doing more research into the actual figures of the pandemic. And in general, I've found that people who do more research on what is going on in terms of the evolution of the numbers and what might be causing cases and deaths to go up and down, that it's not black and white, but they're on average a bit more skeptical of some of the restrictions that have been put in place. And I myself, this is one of the few times that I would ever share any opinion, because opinion shouldn't be the purpose of the channel, but I myself am somewhat more skeptical of many of the restrictions. And yet I have to deal with the fact that every time I log on to my Twitter at the end of the day to see what these 5 or so people have tweeted, that every second tweet is something that I disagree with. And it made me wonder to what extent other people actually do the same thing. I mean, most people that I know would never, ever in their life pay any attention to anyone who has in any way supported the Capitol Hill riots. They would find such a thing to be so distasteful, so despicable, that anyone who has associated themselves with those insurrectionists would be sort of kicked out of their potential circle. And the result of that is that they don't perhaps have the same breadth of opinions on other matters unrelated to that particular issue, which might be relatively black and white. But in terms of other matters, like for example, the pandemic, they don't have that breadth of opinion. I mean, if you only get your news on the pandemic from CNN or in Canada from CBC, it is my opinion that you would have, to a certain extent, a warped view of the risks and benefits of the restrictions that have been put in place. It's difficult. It's difficult because with social media and because of the evolution of the internet that we're now so connected online, I can look up right now tons of people who share every single political opinion with me. I don't have very unusual political opinions, so it'd be very easy to do so. And I can find 400 of them, and I can follow them all on Twitter or YouTube or whatever it is that I want to follow them on. And I can then surround myself with people who have the same opinions as I do and never have to worry about it. And because of that, when some new situation comes along, I can't imagine what, I'm not talking about a virus, it could be anything, but let's say in 2022 there's some new development in the world. If those 400 people with the same views on current events as I do keep posting, I will probably mirror whatever opinions they have, because I'm going to see 400 different people every day posting the same opinion. And it's going to be some sort of feedback loop where we all keep sticking ourselves into the same funnel, and we all keep concentrating our opinions in one direction because we have no easy ability to go out there and challenge ourselves by listening to people that we fundamentally agree with. I don't have much social media, but of the social media that I do have, there are a few people who are posting from time to time anti-lockdown memes or text boxes or whatever it is. And the biggest thing I can say is that the few people I know who've been posting anti-lockdown stuff on social media are all people with fairly simplistic and non-nuanced views of either politics from what their other posts, as far as I can tell, or the pandemic in general. In other words, they're not posting things like, perhaps we should reconsider the costs and benefits of continuing the lockdown for one more month. They're posting things like, the virus doesn't exist, or anyone who thinks we need restrictions is an idiot and I want to delete you off social media. They're posting these extreme comments, they're shouting, they're very angry, they're upset, and they're not really thinking that much or expressing themselves very well. And it's depressing. It's depressing because I don't see this diversity of opinion. I see a few people who are very loud and very simple views of the restrictions, and there's a very large minority that does not associate with those people in any way, and they're also perhaps guilty of having simplistic views just in the other direction, that the lockdown is always good, that any reason for the lockdown to be extended is because people have not been locking down hard enough, etc., etc. So the only question I can ask myself is, and hope that anyone who might see this also asks themselves, is why is it that the only people willing to speak out, the majority at least of people willing to speak out about their lockdown skepticism, are also people with unconventional or otherwise, for at least here in Canada, very conservative political views. Where are the people who I feel represent myself, people who are, I guess I would say in a nutshell, fairly liberal people who also happen to be lockdown skeptical? My guess for the answer to this question is that, like me, until this video, which has taken almost a year after the pandemic started for me to be willing to post something like this, that they are, like me, unwilling to put themselves out there and potentially have someone they know find the video and potentially be seen as one of those people, one of the bad people, one of the people who don't believe the virus exists, who believes that Trump had the election cheated from him and so on. I can say that myself. I don't want in general to express my opinions about the lockdown among people I know because I think they'll put me in a box. They'll put me in a box with the other crazy people they know, and I'm not certain, at least I don't think, that I am crazy enough to belong in that box. Tell me what you think. Thank you.